Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you in camp. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Adam Peigert. I work for the Institute of Planning and Development in the Strategy Department. And thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. We have hopefully an interesting set of new insights and shared experience from our 4 speakers today. I will be introducing them one by one as they take the floor, and I would maybe like to first tell you how tonight will be structured. It will be basically structured in 3 parts. First of all, each of our visitors will give a short presentation about their experience. The experience will be connected to our main topic, and that is something of a culture of work. Maybe some of you are from private sector, some of you from public sector, but the idea today, in connection to the exhibition that is at the entrance, our exhibition Urbania, is the main topic, that the soft impacts, our mindsets, our attitudes, our collective approaches play a big role in how we shape our surroundings, how we shape the city, how the city then shapes back us. And I think that should be reflected in all the speeches today. And after the individual presentations, we would like to engage in a short panel discussion and then open the floor to you. So if you do have questions, or if you will have questions as you will hear the individual speakers, I will just kindly ask you to wait for the last part where we'll be gladly take you in the discussion and hopefully answer your questions. I think without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker today. It's coming all the way from University of Manchester, Professor James Evans, who is the Professor of Human Geography. And James, the floor is yours. I'm looking forward to your first presentation.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful space in your lovely city of Prague. It truly is a beautiful place. As Adam says, I'm based at the University of Manchester. I've been looking at questions of urban sustainability for about 20 years now, and I've become increasingly convinced that we need to pay more attention to how cities and the organizations and communities that make them up learn to change over time. I think not enough emphasis is placed upon that role. So I'm an academic, so I've got far too many slides, as is traditional for us. So we're going to go through fairly quick. Are you all feeling awake? Ooh, that doesn't sound very awake. Is anyone awake? I've just drunk coffee, so I'm awake, and it's nice and warm in here. So the talk is basically in 2 parts, well, I guess 3 parts. The first part will set some context. I've been working on cities for a while now, so as far as I'm concerned, they're extremely important. But for many people, I guess the urban challenge is something they might not be familiar with. So I'll say a few things about that. Then I'll talk a little bit about a specific project that we've been working on with Adam and Tomas and Trinidad called Triangulum, and some experiences from that. And then towards the end, I'll reflect a bit more generally on those themes Adam talked about, which is how changing organizations can help change cities. So the urban century, you may be familiar with this, but by the end of the 21st century, about 80% of humans will live in cities. This is important because it means whatever you're interested in, whether it's aging populations, economic growth, health epidemics, obesity, decarbonization, all of these topics are essentially urban challenges that need to be addressed in cities. So we need urban solutions to make cities more livable, more sustainable places, and we need them quickly. Some of you will be familiar with this kind of graph based on carbon mitigation, how quickly the world needs to cut carbon emissions. Cities are responsible for about 80% of the world's carbon emissions. So if we're serious about cutting carbon emissions, we need to change the way cities operate, the way they look, the way they're built, and the way we live in them very, very quickly. It's not just global climate change that's the problem, of course. Many cities around the world are starting to suffer increasing externalities associated with things like air quality, traffic congestion, poor sanitation, and so on. Now, the interesting thing, because when I started looking at urban sustainability about 20 years ago, it was a good news story because we had lots of solutions. We're like, oh, it's actually quite straightforward. Something like this when you come to mobility. So this is the same number of people in each of these three pictures. This is how much space they take up on bikes. This is in a bus, and this is by motor car. This is 20 years old, this picture. It makes it into most planning master's courses. So we've known this for 20 years. This place on the right, anyone recognize it? BedZ, South London. You'll notice all these sustainable building features, passive heating, cooling, solar panels, car-free neighborhood, hugely successful, completed 20 years ago. Do the houses being built in the UK now look anything like this? No, they don't. They don't look anything like this. And this, I became more and more fascinated by this fact that we actually have many of the solutions we need, but we struggle to implement them. We struggle to implement them rapidly or at scale. And of course, some of that is because cities are quite hard to change. This word, urban obduracy. I'm an academic, so I have to use words that no one understands to make me seem clever. That word for today is obduracy. This is the idea that some objects are obdurate. They're hard to change. They resist change. So, anyone tell me where this is? Just shout out. Don't be shy. It's the evening. Yes, it's Prague. This is a Panelec building in Prague. These kinds of buildings, thin walls, very leaky of heat, very hard to heat. This is the kind of urban infrastructure that I guess you people in Prague are trying to fix in terms of making them better places to live and more sustainable. But it's hard because there's actual materials, structural constraints. There's people living in these places. How do you change them? It's quite hard to do. So there's retrofit. In Europe, certainly, most of the urban form we're dealing with is already built. Other places in the world, it's about new stuff. Anyone tell me where this monstrosity is? You can guess if you don't know. No? No? Dubai. This was built recently, traffic intersection in Dubai. You can see it's impossible to walk from this building to this building. You can't do it. There's no way to walk. You have to drive. And you probably have to drive about 5 kilometers to get from this building to this building. This is bad because this locks in unsustainable behaviors for a long time. It's carbon intensive. It creates pollution. It's also massively wasteful of space. So you could fit most of the historic core of Florence into the footprint of this intersection. So humans need to stop building this stuff. This is the depressing part of the talk. We are still building this kind of crap. So how can cities be changed? How on earth can we do it? This is the biggest game in town at the moment. This is what funding bodies are interested in, governments are interested in it, companies are interested in it, NGOs, communities. We're all struggling with this same challenge. How do you actually change these things? And I guess this comes to the root of the question today. Cities need new ways of working. You're going to get used to really bad graphics because I have to make my own because I work in a university. This graph has money, funding up here for municipalities and time along here. And essentially what's happening for most city government is the amount of funding is decreasing. If you're in Scandinavia, it might be doing that. But most places in the world, it's going down. At the same time, cities are being asked to do more and more, whether it's climate adaptation, climate mitigation, adult care, child care costs, more complex waste contracts, they have to take more and more on. So the amount of pressures on cities, aging populations, is going up. Costs are going up. You've got this gap. And that's really driving this search for new ways of working, partnership working, deeper levels of partnership working, new forms of urban innovation. And that's really, I guess, my starting point for what I'm interested in. What does that look like in cities? Does it work? What are the actual impacts of that in practice? So the second part of the talk, I'm going to talk about this EU project called Triangulum, which you can see here is one of a family of projects funded by the EU. These are smart city projects, but they're specifically intending to deploy technology in actual cities to try and make them more sustainable. So the idea is, by doing it in the real world, generating evidence on whether they work, people should believe that. You know, if there's just technology on the shelf and the manufacturer tells you it's great, you think, yeah, but does it really work? So the logic of these projects was to bring partners together, governments, private sector, communities, to test this stuff in actual cities in Europe and figure out whether they really work. The analogy the EU came up with was lighthouses. They called these lighthouse projects. I think the idea was that lighthouses have a bright light that means you can follow them or illuminate where you should go. But of course, you don't want to go straight towards a lighthouse because you'll hit the rocks and sink. So there's something built in here about learning lessons. It's about figuring out what works, but these projects were also about figuring out what doesn't work. What should other cities not do? You can see the EU really believes in this approach as well. Our project received about 25 million euros. Most of these projects received about 25 million euros. So the EU has put a significant amount of money into developing these approaches. Our project, technologies were deployed in Manchester, Eindhoven, and Stavanger. And then we had 3 cities that were supposed to be looking at those technology deployments and copying them. The word the EU likes to use is replicate. They were going to replicate those solutions. Solutions around mobility and energy were deployed in low-carbon smart districts. And there was private sector partners, big and small, municipal partners, NGO partners as well. So a deep partnership approach to trying things in the real world. This figure, I'm pretty sure, is the reason we got the funding, because it's really simple and powerful. And it makes sense, right? So you demonstrate these solutions in real world, and you generate evidence about whether they work. So do they work? What benefits and impacts do they create? And then if you can generate robust evidence, other people will do it, right? They'll just spread. So that's the logic. So far, so good. Now, I could give you a really boring set of slides on what the physical impacts have been of these. So there's been electric vehicles, electric cargo bikes, smart grid controllers, smart lighting. There's been all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff that add up to some carbon's been saved, some electric vans have replaced diesel vans, and it's all good at the small scale. And the idea was that would then drive replication. So we do it in Manchester, Eindhoven, or Stavanger. We show it works, and then other cities copy. They do exactly the same thing. That's the model. It didn't quite work out like that. And the reason is simple. Cities don't really replicate things. Cities learn. So I'm going to give you one example from Manchester. Anyone seen this kind of infrastructure before? Anyone cycle? Hands up if you cycle. Anyone been to Sweden or the Netherlands? Anyone cycled in Sweden or the Netherlands? You've probably experienced this thing. It's called a floating bus stop. So buses and bikes often end up on the same roads because they're both sustainable. But buses and bikes don't go well together. They're not friends because buses just squash bikes and cyclists die. And buses are always pulling over because of bus stops. So the Dutch, about 40 years ago, came up with the idea of floating bus stops. So the cycle lane goes behind the bus stop so that the bus doesn't squish the cyclists. And these have been common in North Europe for, like I say, 20 or 30 years. This was deployed in Manchester 2 years ago as part of a sustainable mobility scheme on one of the busiest roads, the one with the university on it. It's the first time this infrastructure had been deployed anywhere in the UK. This took about 18 months of convincing the transport planners in Manchester that this was possible. They were really panicked. They didn't think there'd be space on the road. So we actually paid for Dutch planners to come across with tape measures and go out and measure things on the road with them. They were really panicked that bikes would hit pedestrians because that's unacceptable. Bikes being squashed by buses is fine. Bikes hitting pedestrians, no, absolutely not. So eventually they put one of these in, one this side, one that side of the road, and they monitored them. And they tried to figure out whether they worked or not. And they monitored collisions, there was cameras, they interviewed people, bus drivers, and so on. And they finally came to the conclusion that it was all right. They actually said, we're going to have these mini pedestrian crossings because pedestrians are nervous. So that's new. They don't have them in Sweden. But I told this story when I was in Malmö to the environmental planning unit there. And I said to them, this is the most innovative sustainability, mobility thing, infrastructure in Manchester. It's the only one like it in the UK. And they just fell off their seats laughing. They were like, what? We've had these for 40 years. There's nothing innovative about it at all. But there is, because it's new in Manchester. And this is the thing with urban innovation. Innovations, cities have to learn whether it works for them. Cities aren't simply customers. And this is where the idea of replication is not ideal, because it suggests solutions are products, and cities will just buy the product they need. Cities don't even have money. Cities are not singular organizations. Cities don't want cookie-cutter solutions. They don't want exactly the same thing. They'll tell you it's different here. The people are different. The roads are different. The weather's different. The buses are different. The history's different. So they have to try things to get used to them, to see whether they work, to convince people, whether it's city leaders or the public or whatever. So there's something about the ways in which cities change that requires some form of learning to take place. And my hunch is the cities that do this best are the ones that can change fastest. I was asked to talk a little bit about innovation in Manchester. One of the things that I think helped us in the Triangulum project was we had this thing called the Oxford Road Innovation Corridor. And it was a partnership between 2 universities, the city council, and the hospital. And they basically signed a legal agreement saying that they were happy to share data, they were happy to engage in innovation activities, and they were happy to have new energy solutions deployed on their estates. And this is really useful if you're going to try out new things, deploy new things in your city. Having somewhere where people have agreed already that they want to do this is very useful. And essentially it creates an environment where you can try things out, you can experiment, you can monitor from it, but then there's some form of learning. So you're not just generating evidence for the sake of it. There's organizations who have said, we are interested in this. We want solutions to improve energy efficiency. We want solutions to improve mobility. So there's, if you like, a desire, an opportunity to actually learn and change something. We did some survey work with the municipalities involved in Triangulum and asked them about some of the longer-lasting impacts from the project, from being involved in the project. And interestingly, the things they highlighted were the number of spin-off projects and initiatives that had come out of the project that would have enduring impact. They also highlighted organizational change. Most importantly, their organizations, but also other organizations. And this was something that as the project went on, at the start of the project, all anyone cared about was carbon savings, how many euros would be saved, user satisfaction. As the project went on, all the people involved became far more interested in, we're changing the way we do things. We need to change our organizations. We need to change how they do things. So towards the end of the project, we've tried to capture that a little bit more. Apologies, it's another pretty poor graphic, but I'll talk you through it. So what we think happened was at the start, we had what we called the old way of urban governance. So this entire circle, bear with me, is the city. These blue circles are the organizations that were involved in the project. They weren't well networked. They weren't really networked at all. Even within these organizations, the different departments and teams were not always well networked. Now, what a lot of effort went into in the first 3 years of Triangulum went into what we termed alignment. Now, at the time, this just felt like we weren't getting anywhere. This felt like we were totally stuck. But what was actually happening was people were figuring out who the right people were to talk to in their organizations and trying to convince them to come on board. And we were also trying to figure out how we could talk to each other across organizations. And once this happened, we started managing to get things done. And what's happened as a result of the project is essentially this network has been reconfigured. So we have really complete ties between the organizations involved. They're now all linked. Perhaps more interestingly, within the organizations, many more departments and teams are now linked. So before Triangulum, within an organization, we were doing a smart energy project, trying to find out where the energy managers were and who the building managers were was a nightmare. Trying to convince them to talk to you, let alone then trying to convince them to talk to energy managers in another organization. But that's where the magic happens. Once you get those peer-to-peer connections. So again, e-vehicle, fleet deployment. If you want an organization to adopt e-vehicles, you need the fleet manager to be involved. Now, the fleet manager has a bunch of problems and constraints they're under, but so does the fleet manager in this organization. Now, if you can get them talking to each other, they will realize they have shared problems, and they will start to realize that they need shared solutions. And that's essentially what smart solutions are. They're just about connecting things together, sharing services and resources. So we started to think, actually, it's processes. It's these processes that are getting replicated. It's not smart lighting or a smart grid controller. It's actually the processes. The thing Sabadell were most interested in was the Oxford Road corridor. When they came to Manchester, that's all they really asked about. They didn't care about the electric cargo bikes. They knew about them anyway. Leipzig were very interested in the urban living lab approach that was used in Eindhoven on the Stripe S site, which was a post-industrial site. I don't need to tell you, Prague are very interested in the quadruple helix approach because we're here, and that's what this is all about. So it was process, learning about processes that seemed to be important. These are some examples from elsewhere outside of the Triangulum project of how municipalities have changed their organizational structure. So Glasgow and Barcelona created dedicated, what they call client units within the municipality. So these were units where if any technology provider wanted to work with the city, they would go to this unit. The unit would help them find a specific client within the local government, whether that was the buses or whether that was waste or whether that was building management. So it would act like a broker, if you like. Dublin focused on procurement, smart procurement. So they created a process whereby every procurement decision above a certain value has to go through the mayor at the top of the hierarchy, but just before that, it would go through the smart city procurement team, who would check, is there something smarter we could do here? Is there a technological solution? Is there a way to connect up this need with something we already have? So they inserted a new kind of stage, if you like, at the procurement process. Maastricht Planning Department came up with what they call MLab, which was a team who were, I guess, dedicated to innovation, designing new experiments, putting together partnerships of local stakeholders, putting them into practice and trying to scale them up. Eindhoven have gone a stage further. They restructured their entire department. They got rid of waste and traffic and enforcement, and they just had 3 departments: program, design, and execution. So there's no more silos. It's totally cross-cutting. Using smart technology, in terms of enforcement, the same people walking around on the street can report a waste violation. They can knock on the door of an old person who who's missed a medical appointment, and they can also issue parking tickets. And this is where you see technology, the power of technology, starting to change the organization. And if the organization doesn't change, you're never going to realize the benefit of technology. In Triangulum, one of the biggest or the most tangible short-term results of this integration between the partners has been the sheer number of spin-off projects, which I think has been facilitated by the fact these organizations are now working far more closely together. I'll give you one other example from the Triangulum project of how changing your organization can help transform the city. So these are biobuses in Stavanger. Stavanger created a smart city unit which was designed to try and involve all the departments in the city in smart city development. In the proposal, they wanted to do electric buses, and in the true spirit of urban innovation, they tried the electric buses. They didn't work too well. The drivers didn't like them. There was something wrong with the batteries. No one was happy with them. So they switched and tried a biobus. These things run on biogas. Does anyone know how you make biogas? Poo. You poo, and then you put all the poo in a big bucket, and you capture the gas that comes off it, and it's biogas. This really captured the imagination of the residents of Stavanger, because this is sustainable transport, and they were all involved. Whether they wanted to be or not, they'd get the bus and think, this is my poo that's powering this bus. The technology enrolls them into sustainability. Fantastic. The Smart City unit then connected the project up with the culture department, and Stavanger loves its street art, and they ran competitions with school kids and residents for the designs on the buses, and they launched the buses as part of the annual Stavanger Art Festival. So it made an international splash, got huge coverage with the... You're laughing at that joke. That wasn't even meant to be a joke, but I'll use it again. So in this way, the joined-upness of the Smart City unit essentially leveraged a huge amount of value out of the deployment of this technology that really changed the way people in the city think about it. So I've only got a few slides left now. One of the things Tomáš and I have been thinking about a lot is how you measure these impacts. And this is something I know Adam and Monica have been thinking about as well. This is the EU's best shot at it. This is what they talk about. They talk about governance and propagation. Under governance, they talk about organizations, community involvement, multi-level governance. They talk about these factors of success, changing norms and so on. They don't talk about processes. They don't talk about practices. They don't talk about skills or mindsets. They don't consider the long-term nature of these impacts, the fact that a lot of them will only be felt 5-10 years down the line. And they certainly don't give any thought to methods beyond metrics and KPIs. The final thing I just want to highlight is that most of these points I'm making apply to the way cities learn from each other as well. So rather than replication, what you see in practice is something more like propagation. You know the way strawberry plants send out these like shoots, and when they find a nice bit of soil, they just go in there. And it's all a lot more organic. So this city A does something, and then they might do it bigger, and then another city might do it slightly better, and then another city does something and it evolves into B. And people are what carry this knowledge. I'll give you an example. Can anyone take a guess at where this is? This is the Western Harbour in Malmö. Massive development. Anyone been there? Yeah, like it? Yeah, it's all right. Turning torso. Lots of nice sustainable housing, but the key feature is the integration of water and green throughout the development. I was talking to planners about the development of this regeneration, and I couldn't believe it when they said that the inspiration was Bourton-on-the-Water, which is a village in the Cotswolds in the UK. And some of them had been on a study trip there, and they'd been struck by the way in which the village was constructed around the water and how there was green everywhere. This is, if we're serious about understanding how cities learn, we need to understand those kinds of processes. And when you think about the ways in which cities are connected, it actually gets quite scary. So this is Europe at night. You can see all the cities glowing really nicely. I'm going to attempt to point at Prague. Is it there? Roughly? You guys don't look like you know either, so that makes me feel better. It reminds me of this. It reminds me of neurons in a brain. If you're an alien, you'd probably think these are the nerve centers of humanity. They must be connected in the most dense, intelligent way possible. Boy, information about how we should build and run cities must flow seamlessly between these cities. It absolutely does not. It is shameful how little information flow there is between cities, how poor the sharing of information and evidence is. And I think that's why the topic today and the work being done here is quite so important. So final slide, some conclusions. There's something important around the socio-technical nature of change. Technology always changes society, and society changes around technology. So if we want to transform cities, we have to transform ourselves. Processes and practices have been grossly overlooked in this agenda. Some really basic suggestions. Peer-to-peer learning among implementers is critical. Incentives to innovate. This comes down to really boring things like people's job descriptions. Promotion criteria. You have to make it worth people's while. If it's just risk, they won't do it. We need better public engagement so that politicians will back this stuff, because they'll back whatever people want. They're politicians. And the final thing, which I guess is more of a challenge for the universities, is understanding how we evaluate this over the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had the aim to have a quick summary of each of our speakers today. I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but definitely for me, urban obdurancy, number one. Number two, cities do not really copy, but they learn. I think that was a strong message, which will connect to our next speaker. You mentioned the poo bus, which involves everyone. I think that was an interesting point. And I think in the end, learning about processes seem to be most valuable means of exchange from other cities. I think I will just quickly share a quick experience from myself and my colleague Monika Ulhenbrook from the side of the project Triangulum, from the side of IPR. I think over the few years that we had the chance of looking into the offices, such as is the one we have here at IPR, in Holland, in the UK, in Germany, in Spain, they were, I would fairly say they were not using different technologies, or they weren't more educated. But I think the drastic difference was in the way they approached and conducted things. They had different processes for sure, but the general mood and the mindset, the mentality was somehow different. And in the end, it took us a few years to realize that is the biggest difference that basically enables or disenables projects being pushed further or being stopped or achieved. So that was a small observation from my side. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just have a quick question for the audience, just to get a feeling of where you are from. So how many of you are from a private sector? Just if you could raise your hands. From the private sector. Okay. How many of you are from the public sector, working for a public institution? Okay. How many of you are from the NGO, non-governmental sector? Okay. And the rest of you are students, I guess. Okay. Any students? Okay. Great. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. So our next speaker, I think, will connect to the importance of learning. Ivona Kolínská is from the organization Mise Hero that focuses on building basically cultures within corporate organization, but also public spheres. She's a coach and a lecturer herself, and focuses on capacity building. So, Ivona, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello. So my name is Ivona. I am from Mise Hero, as Adam has introduced me. Thank you very much. And I am here to talk about soft skills in the workplace. I used to work in corporate, so I've spent approximately 6 years in Romania working for a corporation. And I was the quality and training manager, which is sort of the soft skill guy among all the people who are interested, as James was saying, and more in the performance and stuff. So first, before I start, so I just wanted to make sure we all know what soft skills are. So we have hard skills and we have soft skills. Hard skills are everything that we can do that we actually create something. So whether it's programming, whether it's using the hammer, speaking a language, that's something I can do. That you can see the result. On the other hand, soft skills, they are more difficult to measure, to grasp, and they might be communication, leadership, and stuff like that. So, why do we often underestimate the benefits of soft skills? Maybe you are familiar with the Golden Circle by Simon Sinek, who talks about a lot about why it is important to think about not only what we do, but also how we do it and why we do it. So he focuses on the why. But first, I would like to ask you a question. If I were to ask you, and don't worry, I'm not going to personally ask you, if I were to ask you the question, what do you do at work? Please raise your hand if you are able to tell me in a few minutes or sentences what you do at work. Yay, thank you. So, at least someone. If I were to ask you, why do you go to work? So, who here goes to work because of the fact that you like it? Yes! Who goes to work because of the money? Yes! Who goes to work because of the people that you like them? Yes! So we all have the reasons. Thank you. We all have the reasons. I did something to it, but I don't know what. It's back. Yeah. So we all have our reasons why we go to work. But if I were to ask you, how do you work? Do you have a clear answer to that? It's a bit more difficult to explain. And this is the soft skills area. That's how we do the things. So we do some things, we might have a reason to do them, and then the way we do them, that's the soft skills. I'm just going to consult my paper if there was something else I wanted to say. And so to answer the question, why do we often underestimate the benefits of soft skills? And that's because we are oriented on the what, mainly on the what we do, but we don't really think about how we do it, or we might not necessarily talk and discuss and present on why it is important, or how we really do it. And why do we need soft skills? If we do we really need soft skills? So the idea is that us as humans, we are social animals. And soft skills are a key to relationships. We can't survive without relationships. Like our humanity is based, our tribes are based on the fact that we live in communities. We are so successful in survival because we live together, we work together, we exist together. And we need relationships to exist together. Hence, we need soft skills in order to build the relationships. Okay, you might ask me, is it really a need, a relationship? Do I need the relationships? I do need to eat, I do need to drink, I need to sleep, I need to have sex, I need the relationships. Well, there might be a difference. Like, okay, if I don't eat, I'll die in a few days. If I don't have relationships, well, I'm not going to die in a few days, technically, but we would die as humans. You know, us as humans, we would die out if we do not reproduce and if we do not live in the communities. So that's why we need soft skills. I was thinking about an example from our work when we work in companies and we do team buildings sometimes. We often get we are asked to think about, okay, we have two teams or two departments and they do not really cooperate amongst themselves. So how can we do that? And we went to one of these things, and with my colleagues, we are really trying, you know, to build the spirit and make them talk to each other. And at some point, I've asked them the question, okay, what is it that you need in order to feel better at work? What would you guess? Would it be more money or something? Surprise, surprise, the people didn't say money. All of them mentioned two things. They mentioned that they would like people to smile at them and they would like people to say hello to them. So yeah, it's pretty basic, pretty simple and easy to do, but that's what people are actually missing. So they're missing what's related to the relationships. And and what happens if we do not have soft skills? This. So Sheldon Cooper, you might know him. He is a great guy, smart guy. He knows why he does his job. He does a great job, an important job. But the way he does it, not necessarily the job, but in general, the relationships, he lacks soft skills. So it's very difficult for him and for the people who don't have soft skills to build the relationships which we need to be happy in work and which we need for our survival. Yeah, and what stops us? That's another question. What stops us from actually paying attention to soft skills or putting more money into soft skills? I think, James, this is what was the word? Obduracy. I think that's a good example of obduracy. And this is how I felt as a quality and training manager in corporate. Because you're surrounded by all the people who care about the performance, about the key performance indicators, about how much money we have gained last year, this year, you know, about all the performances that you can actually measure. And as James was saying, it's very, very difficult to measure soft skills. We need them, they're very important, but they're difficult to grasp, they're difficult to measure. So it's also very difficult to get budgets for them, to train them, etc. And people always come, like when I was a quality and training manager, and I was like, yeah, you know, I came up with all these trainings for things on communication and time management and stuff that would actually help the people. It was a call center, actually. to deal with the customers, and I always got the answer, well, we don't have time for that. So I created the training, but it was never applied because, well, we couldn't measure them, and there was always a different priority. So I think that another thing that stops us is the prioritization and what we choose. Yeah, and another thing that I wanted to say is that we do not realize that business is about people, because clients are people, customers are people, and employees are people. So even in business, if you don't get people, if you don't work with people, we don't really get the business. Because money is the fuel. That's what Simon Sinek says, the dude that I mentioned in the beginning. I really like him, big fan. Money is the fuel. So we need the fuel in order to get somewhere. Without the fuel, the car doesn't work. But at the same time, we don't buy a car in order to buy gas. So it's not only the money that we go to work to. And Adam asked me a question: what is the way forward? So how do we get from here so that let's say in our future we create a future where we pay more attention to soft skills and to the soft part. And it might be a cliche, but I truly believe in it, and that's be the change you want to see in the world. As Gandhi said. So if this is something that we value, if the way that we work is something that we value, if how we treat people is something that we value, and we would love to live in that culture, then we need to be the guys doing that. So my invitation for you is to really think about how you do the things, not only what you do or why you do it, but also how you do it. And think about when you go to work, you sit in your office, laptop, blah, blah, blah. Think about the guy on your left, the lady on your right, and what is it that you can do maybe for them so that they had a better day at work. And that's how you really create your relationship, and you might create the atmosphere in which you actually you like to work. And my last slide is about holacracy. So us in Mission Hero or Mise Hero, we are a holacracy, and this might be one of the ways or suggestions how to move forward as organizations. So what is holacracy? Holacracy is let's start with hierarchy. So here we have hierarchy. That's the structure that we all know. There is a CEO, there is management, there are the supervisors, there is the staff. That's how we do. We have a boss, we report to a boss, and that's how we operate. In holacracy, there is no boss. We have we work on trust, on freedom, and we are all, let's say, at the same level. It might be difficult to imagine how this works, how we take decisions, but it is actually the very natural thing to be, because we are free. We take decision by advice. So there are, let's say, if I want to take decision, whomever I am, I can take any decision for the company, financial or small, big, anything. The only thing that I need to do is to ask the people, all the people that are involved in the decision. I ask them for advice. I take it, I leave it, and then I decide. It's really, really built on trust, and we somehow operate as a tribe, as a circle of friends. So we take our responsibility, not because we have to, not because somebody tells us, but because we promise, etc., etc. And also the thing that is being very sort of popular in these days is the thing that I'm not gonna remember the name. which is, I hate when I can't remember words. I'll think if I have a look, if I have it here or not. I don't. So you might not get to get this piece of information, which you'll probably survive without. But the thing is, I can't think of the word for it. But the thing is that that's a new way of management, which agile. That's the word. Agile management, which is pretty much that we work the way that it's logical. So if we take a decision, we do something, and then it's not applicable anymore, we just don't do it. If we would like to do something as a company and there is nobody who wants to do it, we don't do it, etc., etc. So agile is a big part of holacracy as well. So that's all from my part. Thank you very much, guys, for not falling asleep. And I'll give the mic to Adam. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll just shortly add to it that we had last year over 40 interviews, structured interviews with our colleagues from Magistral, from other organizations in Prague, basically as an input for the exhibition that you may have been to, or maybe you will have a chance to go to Urbania, which is based on a number of stories basically put together. And one of the key questions in that interviews was what are your motivations, or what is the opposite, that what basically turns you down at work. And a lot of times the responses were the same, and the motivations were things that are very, you might think, easy to change, or are not related to monetary means, not to money, but precisely having a good relationship or being recognized by your superior for what you do. So that were things that were either really motivating the people or were lacking. So thank you for reminding us about that. And I will turn to our third speaker today, which is Tomáš Vácha from the Czech Technical University, head of the department that deals with participatory design and planning. Tomáš Vácha is a social psychologist himself, and I welcome him to the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adam, for introduction. My presentation will have one main thought I will be work with, and that's quite simple and not really eyebrow rising. And that's that the culture of collaboration helps cities to be innovative. And I will be following James here quite a bit. And if you feel that I use same language or that we have similar topics, it's because we work together. In last couple of years, we met several times and discussed together some of those topics. So this is where we maybe got quite close together in some of them. So I will try to answer a couple questions. First, who I am, how did I get here? Then what is urban innovation? And James was talking about it quite a bit, so I will have easier job here. Then how can stakeholder engagement actually support innovation in the cities? What did we learn from collaboration with cities so far? And if there will be some spare time, we will try to do a little experiment together. So, I'm from Innovation Center, this is part of Czech Technical University, and we focus on multidisciplinary research in sustainable buildings and urban development. We are applied, or we focused on applied research, which means we actually try to work together with cities, companies, government to design actual innovations. We're not doing primary research that much. And this is our lovely building. Now, the second question I put, is there a team of social scientists in this technological center? And the answer is yes, there is one, and I'm part of it. And what we do is we apply methods of social scientists in innovation projects. And what we do is we inform people involved in those projects to help them understand what they are about and what solutions are available to them. We improve our understanding on what people need on a local level and what they fear. We also directly engage them in co-designing, testing, and evaluation of solutions being developed in the project. And we try to encourage them to participate in the implementation, actually using the solution and supporting on a long time scale. And generally, we try to support mutual understanding, cooperation, and sharing between stakeholders. The premise of the presentation is that innovation is something we want, and cities should want to innovate, and they should collaborate in order to be able to innovate. So what is innovation? It's a buzzword to start, but it actually has some meaning if you try to make it make sense. So innovation is any new idea or concept that's applied into specific context. So it actually happens. It needs to bring improvement. Otherwise, there's no point of doing it. So it needs to reduce resources, improve quality. And any innovation, by definition, has some degree of uncertainty. Yeah, I just don't know how things will turn out in the end, and I have some questions that I need to answer in the process of innovating. And innovation always brings change, but it also requires things to change, as James pointed out. And every innovation has some sort of soft or social aspects and impact. Even new nuclear reactor will have some social impact. People will react to it. People will strike to stop it from happening. If it actually is developed, people will have to learn to use it. They will have to find money to fund it. Then it will maybe reduce the price of energy or increase it. So anything that we do has some social impact, even outside of city. Now, what is urban innovation? That's an innovation that affects the city as an ecosystem. So it's not just new phone that anybody in the city can buy, but it's something that actually happens on the level of the city and requires some interaction of the stakeholders to make the thing happen. Urban innovation is about finding new ways to meet social, environmental, and economic and technologic challenges that cities are facing, and the municipality and local actors are active in the process of developing, implementing, and operating the solution. There are various areas of urban innovation James described: mobility, energy, services, ICT, etc. We have experience from Triangulum project that was mentioned already, and what we did was we worked with Prague 7 closely on learning from the city of Stavanger and also other cities involved in Triangulum, and we helped Prague 7 to develop new solutions in social services for the elderly, the senior citizens. And you can imagine this is something that quite well fits in all those criteria. It's something that needs to be addressed on the level of the whole ecosystem. It definitely brings changes, and you definitely need people work together. So if you talk about urban innovation, if you want to innovate something in the city, you need to understand the context you are working with. And I just put several aspects of the context you need to understand when you try to innovate in a city. You need to understand current processes and organizational structures that are in place. You need to understand what funding mechanisms are there and what resources are available. You need to understand the needs and competences of people that will be using the technology or even social innovation. You need to understand policy, regulations, behavior and habits, and how they may need to change if you will introduce new technology. And you need to understand current infrastructure and know-how. And what's important is that it's quite obvious that the solution needs to be adapted to fit the context. This is something that's quite often done. Companies are analyzing needs of the users and they try to adapt it to fit its users. Participation is quite well established practice, and everybody is trying to fit the solution to the context. But what is important that we need to adapt the context to support the solution. So we need to figure out how the solution will be funded, what processes and organizational structures will have to be in place to be able to have a new mobility system or have a new system of social care for the elderly. So how can we make the innovation fit to meet, to adapt the context to the solution and vice versa? We need to engage local stakeholders right from the beginning and define common goals and understanding what the problem is. So we need to analyze needs and expectations of all relevant stakeholders. In the cases I described at Prague 7, we engaged the elderly living independently in their homes, their families, informal carers, social service providers, doctors, insurance companies. We worked with the municipality of Prague 7, but also with the municipality of the city of Prague. And we created this ecosystem that was able to describe quite well what the situation is right now, and it was able to co-design a localized model that would work for everybody. You need to provide information and support informed decisions. So everybody needs to have information. You need to feed the information back. So if you perform needs analysis, you need to then provide it back to everybody so everybody knows what the current status is. And you need to learn from others and find inspiration, as James described. It's very often about finding people, so we were lucky to be part of Triangulum, where we could fly to Manchester and talk to people. We could visit Stavanger. People from Eindhoven and Stavanger would come to the sessions where we sit with all the stakeholders and they could teach us what they've done. As I said, you need to co-design a localized model of the solution, test and experiment on small scale, and once implemented, you need to gather continuous feedback on what you did. And what's quite important, you need to co-design not just the technology itself, new software that will help to manage social care and smart boxes that will help to detect if people are in crisis in their home. You need to co-design the soft measures as well as a part, integrated part of the solution. So you need to think of new processes, organization models, education, training, information campaign. And the last thing I'll be talking about is what is the culture of collaboration, because Adam set the theme for today to be the culture of a city, a working culture of the city. So I checked out the Merriam-Webster dictionary to find what culture is, and it said the culture is the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization. So if you take this logic, then culture of collaboration or city that has culture of collaboration is a city that shares the positive attitudes towards collaboration, its values, collaboration as an important principle, so it's normal and it's desired. The collaboration can be seen in the goals of the city, and translates in vision and strategy goals. And there are some practices at play that enable collaboration. How to build it? We need to start with first projects that will be more difficult, will require more money and more time to implement proper collaboration and have a big working innovation ecosystem. And when we need to give it priority and being able to learn from this process to make it more easier in next time. We quite often say cities that they shouldn't evaluate the participation and its difficulty from point of view of one project, but they should know that if they do it once, it will be easier next time, and the next time it will be even easier. And you need to the city needs to figure out what they actually need to support this kind of process in the future. So at the beginning, they can work with somebody like us, with university, with experts on collaboration, on facilitation, and they will actually maybe pay more money. But in the end, they will figure out that having participation office will pay out, and there are some stakeholders that should maybe meet more regularly. So they create permanent working groups where they will meet. And how it impacts the city, as I said, it should make it easier to go through the whole innovation process faster because you already have contacts to your stakeholders, and they will be used to it. They will know what it means. They will have common language. If you say there is participatory workshop, they will know what to expect and if they should turn out and who to sign to the process and what skills are required to do that. And it's quite important to say that practices of engaging stakeholders into design, implementation, and operation of new solutions are innovation of their own kind, and they also should be evaluated, shared with others, and improved over time. And now just I promise just a few points from what we learn from engaging people in innovation projects like Triangulum. So, first point, people don't want new technology, they want a solution. But they will welcome new technology if they see it as a solution. Next, people can't demand what they don't know exists. So this is why it's really important to learn between cities, have experts present, take municipal representatives on tours to other cities to actually see what is there so they know how that looks like and that they can require the same thing. Worries can be irrational, but they have to be accepted and discussed. Very often you have people that don't understand the technology fully, or they have bad experience, and they will seem to you that they are irrational. This doesn't make sense, but you have to accept it and discuss. Experts have to listen, so we need to analyze people's needs and talk to them, have interviews and questions, but we also have to explain and inspire, and we need to learn how to do that. And facilitation is often necessary to have experts explain something because they maybe don't know how to do it on their own. Local context has to be considered and used in explaining and discussing solutions. It's good to say it worked in Manchester, but taking specific organization and say what their role would be, what they would benefit if they do that, what a specific municipal district would look like if they implemented the solution. That's important. That's what really makes people believe in it. There's the second part. Stakeholder needs to know what the solution means for them, and they need to be able to adapt to it. You need to be curious, and the interest needs to be genuine. It really works if you really take people as a partners and you actually really are interested in what they feel like, what they need, they will cooperate and they will appreciate it. And discussion about new solutions can bring people together and initiate further collaboration, as Triangulum in Manchester proved, for example. So that's it from me. Thank you. Thank our brave participant for taking part in the demonstration, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you also to the audience, not only for participating in our experiments, but sticking with us. I think we are going a little bit longer than we expected, but then again, I think we have still much to share, but we will slowly flip over to the panel discussion. But before that, we have our final speaker. Just a quick note to what Tomáš was talking about. I think what has been so far very encouraging from observing other cities such as Manchester or Stavanger from Norway, that we admire not only that they have different processes, different ways of approaching things, but they all have the culture that they are accustomed to. It's normal for them to cooperate. It's normal for them to have multidisciplinary approach, to have actually functional diverse teams, for instance, in approaching issues. But if you take in consideration, for instance, such thing as participation. So maybe for most of you it's already a common term, but about 3 or 4 years ago it has not been so commonly known or normalized or expected even. It took the last 3 years of quite intensive, let's say, propagation and also education, but also intensive push, and it slowly became a standard. I think that most of us already expect from the city to at least consider or even apply in projects that they deal with. So I think slowly things can change and can suddenly become part of our normal expectations. For our last but not least speaker, I would like to welcome Trinidad Fernandez, which is a project manager of our international projects on behalf of the Fraunhofer Institute based in Stuttgart. And I think she will share with us, we will end on a big picture point of view, what it means and what are the lessons learned from basically steering and managing large projects around the world. So, Trinidad, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Adam, for the lovely introduction. So hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation as well. So as Adam told already, I will try to steal a bit of all your speeches, and I will also include in what I prepared for today. But basically what I will talk about, it's the reflecting on the experience of managing projects and implementing smart cities in Europe, and how are we going now with my organization, Fraunhofer Institute, beyond that into other countries. So, I need this. So, super. So, about to start. Why it's not? Yeah, super. Well, as Jay mentioned, we worked together in the Triangulum project. I won't tell you much about that, only just a brief overview of who we are. And it's basically 3 cities collaborating and building around 60 pilot projects together. That it's Manchester, Eindhoven, and Stavanger. Luckily for me, James mentioned one use case from Manchester, Stavanger, and I prepared one from Eindhoven, so that is great. We were connected. And the follower cities, we are already in one of them, that's Prague. Well, we are in Prague. And, well, Leipzig and Sabadell there, we're looking into it. But as, well, Thomas, James, and also Ivona mentioned, we have this proposal within our project that it was replication. But within the project, and well, James already mentioned, we realized that what is replication? Like, we were like kind of inventing the wheel. If you actually ask the Commission, the European Commission, they say like, well, we still don't have the answer for what replication, what did we mean with replication. So for us, we had like literally in the project one big sheet of paper where we can really think about what does replication means for us, for the cities, for the companies, for the universities. What do we want to achieve with that? And within the project, we did it in 2 ways. One, well, we have, as we mentioned already, these lighthouse cities, implementing projects, and we developed 2 branches. One, as you see, is the technology transfer. We develop a tool, and we kind of identify the most important aspect of its solution, and how can this aspect be clustered and be used, for example, for another city. yeah, I know it sounds complicated, so I will just give an example. For example, I'm CDA, and I just go to this tool that is actually a tool, Excel tool, and I'm CDA, and I want to develop, I have a problem with traffic, so I just click traffic, and then, and my city is so and so big, and I need, I have a problem of engaging people to use bikes. So at the end, this tool calculates everything, and it shows like the most relevant solutions for your problem. That was what we called also like a technology transfer approach, because we focus more on the technology. But as technology is not the solution, within the project we realized that we also needed to think about the of a customer-centric approach, like what did in this case the followers did need, what were their needs, and we realized it and we discovered that it's not about just implementing solutions, putting cargo bikes, like, I will just bring them from Manchester and just drive here in Prague. What we realize is that they want to learn this process. Well, you already mentioned, but it's exactly that the point. Like, we don't get financing for that, but we do it anyway, and it's great. So, and at the end, it's exactly what it is. All this about is about changing the mentality that we have to prove, of course, in the project that we reduce X amount of CO2 emissions, etc. But what we are getting is huge. It's a huge learning, and I'm really happy that we can use and take advantage of that, and that we really thought about the wider impacts instead of how much CO2 we're reducing. So, to finish this this slide, I just want to mention, like, yes, of course, if we try the solutions, we will reduce the risk of the companies implementing, and we can try it whether they work or not. But if we share the knowledge, at the end we're creating experts in smart cities, and we will also learn from the mistakes from the other cities, and at the end we will become experts. And how which expertise did we have in the project? Well, we developed projects in 3 sectors: mobility, energy, and ICT. I know ICT for some it's a bit weird terminology, but it's, in my opinion, it's all the services that comes together, and it's not just a data thing, but it's literally like the integration of urban systems. So I will also explain now with a example of that, and also focus on energy. And it's the case of Eindhoven and Woonbedrijf. In Woonbedrijf, well, in Eikhaard-Vaarbroek, a district in the Dutch city in the Netherlands, they developed a tool, a 3D tool in BIM. I don't know how many of you are architects. Well, you know what BIM is, I think. Well, building yeah, it's like a. Have you played The Sims? No? Yeah? Yes, it's like that. So you see it's exactly like that, because you see your house, like as you see in the diagram, you see your house in 3D. And what our project partners did is that this house in 3D, they show it to the tenants, the actual tenants of the houses, and they could choose which renovation measures and also renovation artifacts can be built in their house, and it was automatically showing how much energy they were saving, and it was also giving some tips, like if you shower less this week, you will save X amount of money. Well, I won't go so much into detail, but it's about gathering the data in pro of something. And for me, one thing is the technology. Of course, the software, it's really fancy, but what it is behind this, I find it's really, really important that it's a solution, that it's the heart of the solution are the people. How can I convince my tenant to renovate their houses? How can I explain my tenant why it's important to reduce the CO2 emissions, but to reduce their energy consumption? How can they do it? So it's, for me, it's way more than a 3D tool, beam, fancy. It's about the people. It's about engaging. It's about educating people into these subjects. And that goes to my very last slide, not of the presentation, but at least from Triangulum, is that we have the implementation of these 70 use cases, and we have this expertise building that we said. Within the project, we did 14 workshops with all the partners, so it's awesome that we could have the opportunity to exchange among all of us. But it was way more than that. It also went to monitoring, to have also the opportunity of learning about these processes, to learn what really went good, what can we learn and make more out of it. And as James already mentioned, it was literally a smart city accelerator for all cities. So at the end, we were just a stone, and suddenly we have like a hurricane. And yeah, we were just a soft wind, and now we have a smart city hurricane in all cities, and we're proud of it. But what is behind this? And well, this is a picture of our last review meeting in Brussels. You can see Adam there and James as well, maybe in the picture. If they don't, well, yeah, actually you can. But what is behind? I think it's something I also mentioned within this use case in Eindhoven, and it's the people. We don't work. I don't work with I work with my computer, but I communicate with my partners. And to have a good relationship with your partners, to understand your partners. I mean, in the case of Triangulum, we're like 6 different countries working together. You have Nordic countries, southern countries like Spain. You have so many, well, here in Prague, we have so many different cultures working together. Me, myself, well, I don't know if you realize it, Trini, that's not a real German name, so I'm also from Latin America. And it's, of course, a challenge, but it's also really rich. It enriches the project. It makes it even more interesting, this interaction. And also one thing that I would like to mention on this slide, and maybe if you, well, if you're a woman, maybe you can find it more easily. If you can see, there are really few men. Did you know this? No? Yeah, well, I can proudly say also that in the management of the project, all the decision makers are women. Yeah. James doesn't have a vote, and he's part of the call, but he doesn't have a right to vote. But I mean, not joking, but that is one. That's one thing that first, of course, it makes me proud. I'm a woman, but it goes for me with the next subject that I want to bring up here now, and it's about the other side of the world. We were talking about Europe in general, and what the problems of Europe are, and the challenges. And I know that we have learned in all these projects a lot of the process learning on the implementation of the project, etc. But the world has other challenges, and especially if I'm talking about, well, my other project where we are a lot of women, I'm definitely sure that in other countries this is not the reality. And this reality really needs to change. It's, as you can see here, well, there's only a map of the income inequality or equity in the world. As you see, Europe's really good. But gender balance in general, some people don't believe this, but gender balance is crucial if we want to achieve sustainability. Why? I will tell you later. But what I want to say, all these women that you see, for example, this lady over here, for example, or for example, this is actually the one city in Peru, in Piura, where we have a project with, and when we go to these places, at least for me, being a woman, or we have a project with Mexico, Peru, and India, and I don't have a group of 10 women leading us in the European project, and that's why I start asking myself why, and I got a bit deeper into the question of why how can we achieve this gender equity? Is it important? Why is actually a SDG? There is an SDG about social equity. And then I realized that it's super important. It's super, super important for gender equality to tackle the climate change. And I will just explain it with this example. Because yes, I was also a bit skeptical at the beginning, like why gender equity will help my city or my organization or the world in general. But for example, here, as you can see in the first picture, there's a woman in Asia, somewhere in Asia, and she's cooking. And while she's cooking, she's getting sick because she's getting all these pollutants of cooking with wood. But she's really poor because she lives in, she has this indoor charcoal stove, but she's risking her life, and since she's getting ill, she also cannot go work. And most probably also in her country, she also doesn't have the opportunity of going to work. So she cannot really improve her life. She cannot really, she depends of course on his male partner, but she cannot really improve herself. She will always cook with this pollutant stove, and most probably she will die soon because of lung cancer or something like that. And it's a really sad reality, but it's true. It's happened. It happens every day. And also, but in this case, maybe that woman has also an idea, and also a business idea, but she doesn't have the opportunity. And this idea might also benefit her community, her family, and maybe other women in her village. And well, it's not the same village, but if she had the opportunity, maybe she will develop something like that. This is one use case in Chile, where in the desert they realized that, well, we have so much sun produces so much energy. Why don't we, instead of bringing gas and cooking with gas or cooking with the stove of this lady that is getting almost killed, why don't we use it? And now they have like a small SME with solar cookings. And you see it here, and they got like funds from the government, and they're, well, really successful. But they had the opportunity of doing it. They had the chance. And now they are like the householders of their houses. And that's one thing. But from the other thing, and why I think it's also important to empower women, and it's because if you don't empower women, you're leaving the 50% of the population. And secondly, because it's proven already that women are the ones that have most knowledge in in the household. Like, for example, if I go back, for example, I won't say that this idea maybe there is a man that can think about an idea of cooking, but most probably, or at least in these countries that I'm showing the examples, the people that are cooking the most are women. So if we empower more women, we can also empower maybe some solutions that we will never come or will never face an implementation or a pilot project. And that's why I think it's really important that we have more Gretas, more women voices, especially in the countries that most need it. And yeah, that's it from my side. And yeah, thank you.
So perfect. Thank you very much. So I know we are basically about 40 minutes late, but I would like to still invite all our speakers up to the front. I have one question for them, and then we will open to you. So thank you once again for your speeches, and if you join me over here, facing the crowd, and so maybe you guys are familiar with what these symbols are. They basically are, let's say, our 8 principles that we offer for discussion within our exhibition, Urbania. They are less of a dogma, rather an opening statement for a conversation that we have identified over the course of especially last year, and they were the ones that repeated the most as sort of a success factors of doing things. Rather than talking about if they are right or wrong or sufficient or not, I would like to ask you about one particular, and let's say one of the most discussed, and that is whether failure, that's connected to the experimentation, basically an error, is something that you see within your work, within your, let's say, space of doing things within either municipal development or academic research or international projects, or even while doing projects within corporate sort of environment. How do you perceive trial? Do you see a benefit in it? What is it to you? So maybe James, can I start with you?
Yeah. Great question, big question. I'm going to try and be as quick as possible by giving an example. So in Stavanger, they wanted to heat a municipal swimming pool using renewable energy. Uses a lot of energy. They were going to use a heat pump, so just go down into the rock, pull the heat out of that. They made some initial drillings, spent quite a lot of time and effort and money. Turned out it wasn't viable. The rock wasn't the same as it was 2 miles away, or 2 kilometers away, where they'd done this before. So they started looking at other possible sources. They looked at all sorts of things, including even wave power from the bay with the ships in. This was a failure as well. So this part of the project was failing for 3 years. And then they talked to some planners one day who said there was a sewer underneath this swimming pool. Big sewer. We're back to poo. It's more poo. That generated heat. And they actually put heat converters down in this big sewer. And now that heat is used to heat the swimming pool. So I guess for me, it's one of the most powerful stories of partners coming together and conducting a trial and error kind of experiment of, is it possible to heat this pool in a renewable way? It failed, then it succeeded. And what it ended up with was actually a much better solution, a much more elegant solution, technically, in terms of efficiency and in terms of public engagement and PR than the original planned solution. They're currently trying to convince other parts of the city to heat their pools in a similar way. They haven't managed to do it yet. So is it failing in that sense? So the question of does something succeed or fail is often not a very helpful one. It's often not quite that clear cut. The two things kind of go hand in hand.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the hypotheses behind the principle is that a failure can be opportunity. But the question is how often that's the case. Because if you want to actually use the failure to turn turn it into opportunity, you need to be able to learn from that. You need to be able to change something. And you need to be able to understand what caused the failure. And I think this is something that very often isn't possible in the project, and there's no space for it. And I think this is something that can be addressed in pilot projects, in small demonstrations, where you try the thing in a small scale and you actually allow it to fail, and you watch it closely, and you have measures that help you to collect data on what's going on and understand what happened, and then you have enough time and resources to transfer the failure into knowledge and to share it. You yourself as an organization or city can learn, and also you can teach other cities and help them to prevent this failure at the beginning. So I think failure can be good, but you need to create an environment that actually allows you to gain something from the failure, rather just making it happen and not teaching a thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, also in my experience, also to build up what Tomas was saying, from the environmental perspective and different cultures, there's also in other cultures the idea, for example, of feedback. We were discussing in a round before about how feedback it's taken by the people that are being feedbacked or criticized. And in some cultures, this is extremely wrong. It's something like that. If you, for example, prepare a presentation, I really believe that here in Europe, feedback and I heard it from several new events called "We will do a fuck up night" to talk about the things that didn't work, to learn about that. And I think in other realities, to talk about what went wrong, it's almost like a taboo. If you criticize someone, it's almost felt like an attack, and I think it's something that really needs to change, because it's the only way that we can grow, if we learn from our own mistakes. And that's at least what in my organization are trying with this scaling up of projects I mentioned in Mexico, India, Peru, but in general in the globe, and to bring it to other realities, so they can start also reflecting and making benefits of the mistakes, and not saying, well, I did a mistake, it was bad, but also to make the most out of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I don't like to fail. I don't like to make mistakes. It makes me uncomfortable. I just don't like the feeling, because when we make mistakes or fail, it's not a beautiful feeling. But unfortunately, as you are all saying, it's the fastest way to learn, because I don't like it, then I tend not to repeat it. So if I make mistake, it's learning by hurting. It hurts, but I usually make quite sure that I don't do whatever I did again. So yeah, I would say it's the hurtful but fastest way to learn.
Okay, so thank you very much. I will skip my 3 pages of questions, and I will open up the floor to the brave audience that didn't leave us. So we have, I think, some additional microphones, or we can use the ones we have here. If you have a question, please put your hand up and talk to the microphone, so we have it here. So any question? Okay, sir. First.
It is not so much a question, but a tip to make another 2 evenings about 2 books. One Czech bestseller was The Rebellion of Deprivants. This means the emotional deprivants by Professor Kokolík. And second is, in my humble opinion, my book, Sexuarium in the Center of the City. I'm thankful to Ivona because she mentioned that we need some conditions and relationships for our sexuality. So instead of quoting here how it was in Pompeii, how it was in the medieval city, how it is now in San Francisco, where a sort of sexuarium was in the center of the city, but unfortunately it was projecting pictures outside and collecting money inside. But what about if not this, and there is a sexuarium? Well, so this is simply about the second book, but about the first book, The Rebellion of the Deprivants, in fact, now I'm after my first year in my pension, and I can tell you, you will meet in your life, you will not ask very much your stakeholders what they want, but you can meet there among them also some deprivants. But you will meet the criminals and deprivants in the realization team. One very arrogant person will be bullying the others. That means these problems are the focus. Maybe instead of Professor Kokolík and his rebellion, just the famous poetry by François Villon about the discussion about the king and pirate. They are just the same, but only the pirate has a very simple barca. Yes. So this is, I think, yes, it is very important concerning sexuality because we are, I think, normal, but we say it. But I wait a little minute or a few seconds when somebody says, not that we do not need any conditions for our sexuality, but they do not want to speak about it. And this minority is bullying the majority who, of course, declares that we and you need some conditions for our sex. So whether it is only in the family, or it will be some institution, or it will be beyond the walls, together with hangman and alternative medicine, or whether it can be in the center of the city, which I planned. But it is everything. So only these two books. Let us also remember about who was not normal very much. In the south of Bohemia, there are ponds to produce proteins in fish. And the man who constructed them 400 or 500 years ago, he was hated by the peasants because they had to build the dams. But till today, we have the proteins for our Christmas. So now this is the question. You do not speak about these horrible tensions between money, power, and the lazy peasants who do not want to work on the dams.
Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Any other questions that came up? Oh, so you want to react? No. Or I'm sorry if you do. There was another question. That's why I didn't turn to it. But is there perhaps a question to some of the presentations that took place this evening, or any of the points made? Or you have one? Okay.
As I know from you, Trinidad and Ivona, as you also mentioned, you were both working or are working outside of your country, of your city, like where we were born. So was it kind of a cultural shock for you to, let's come to Germany, or to go to Romania, or did you see a lot of similarities or big differences between the attitude and the culture of work in the companies where you're working now?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Romania is not very far away, so I would say the culture is quite similar. The people are saying there's a lot of corruption, and I'm saying we have a lot of corruption too, and stuff like that. I used to work in a corporation, so the culture was, I think, quite similar in the way of how respected I felt, and etc., etc. But what was very different for me in Romania was you were talking about the gender equality, and one might think that's okay towards the east, you know, that might get worse and worse. So It depends. Like for the managers, for example, we were a few women, mainly men, but a few women comparing to the fact that majority of the employees were actually women, which was a bit odd. On the other hand, what surprised me, like one of the very first days when I was in the elevator, and I was in the elevator, and how do you act in the elevator? You know, you get on, there's a bunch of people, and then you get off, whomever is closest to the door. In Romania, when I am as a lady, I'm the last one in the elevator, you know, next to the wall, and it's like, you know, there, and there's like 8 men, and it's impossible for me to get out from there. What the men do, they'll squeeze so that I can leave, because I am the lady. I need to leave first. So they're doing all things that were not practical in order, you know, like holding doors when it was really not practical for them to hold them to me. And I really enjoy that. So yeah, being a woman in Romania is very, very lovely.
Yeah, well, interesting. Yeah. Well, in my experience, one aspect that I really, really enjoy of Germany, besides that it's one of the countries in comparison, at least to my hometown, we have a lot of holidays. That's something I enjoy a lot. But, well, if I come to the cultural aspect, I think in maybe I will generalize, it can be an European thing. It's that there is a hierarchy, but it's not so rough as it is in Latin America or in other realities. And that's one of the things I enjoy the most. And I think it's really cool because it makes you grow a lot, and it makes you a bit more independent. And that I can say that it's one aspect that I really enjoy, and that it's also a cultural thing, because they, at least working in Germany, they believe a lot and trust a lot in their employees. For example, we have something, maybe you also have a home office. I never heard of that when I was in Chile, and I know that they are developing now. But this big amount of trust on the employee, that it doesn't matter where you are, but you will accomplish your tasks and your duties. And that's one thing that I believe in other cultures, and in my home country it's a bit different. And of course the gender balance situation. I mean, in the country I come from, we did have a president that was a woman, so there is a strong vision about women in power, but that is not the reality of other places. And I really believe that even here in Europe, it's something that it shocked me a bit, that before I've been living in Germany for 10 years, so on, and I didn't believe that when you are a foreigner and you think about Europe, you think about liberalism, and that a lot of things don't happen in Europe regarding like gender discrimination, but sadly it still is. And that's one thing, it shocked me, that even though Europe is so progressive, but there is still, for example, a lot of organizations that have CEOs that are only male, and we're like in 2020, like why? Or there are still a lot of organizations that have, for example, that don't give facility of women to have kids, or or also I heard from a lot of, well, not colleagues, but also friends and family, like, if you are a woman and you are working and try to pursue your careers a lot, it's also a bit like, yeah, but why? You're a woman. You should be at home, or if you're married, why don't you have children and take care of the children and stay more at home. So for me, that's one also shocking thing that I didn't expect that happens here in Europe, but it does. So, well, it also does in Chile, but but I didn't expect it here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So thank you very much. I think we kept you long enough. I just checked my watch is 9, so I think camp is actually about to close anyway. So I think we can end on the note that we can learn, hopefully, from each other as we sit here, but obviously within other cities in our country or continent, or like it seems to reflect upon your last statement, across the continents, and hopefully enrich each other. Hopefully you can take something away, hopefully something inspired you from the presentations that we shared with you today. But definitely thank you for staying so long, and thank you to all our panelists for sharing it with us, and have a good evening. Thank you.